The aviation industry is seeing more and more people transitioning into second careers as pilots, controllers, mechanics, and even content creators. So where did they come from? What were they doing before? What made them realize and chase their dreams? We find that out right here on Fly the Transition. Welcome everyone to our preview episode of Fly the Transition, where we explore the stories of those making the leap into a new career in aviation. I am your host, Jim Schilling. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join me as we take off into this new podcasting adventure. Yes, the aviation pun was completely intentional. So in this shortened episode of the podcast, I'll talk to you about what the Fly the Transition podcast is all about, how the idea came about in the first place, the stories that I hope to tell, and with any luck, how I hope to inspire others who are looking to make that same transition themselves. So as I get started, I want to thank all of you who have made the transition over here from the Fly Midwest podcast to check out the new podcast, Fly the Transition. Just to put your minds at ease, the Fly Midwest podcast is not going anywhere. That is still a project that is near and dear to my heart. I'm so excited for what Maddie, Trevor, and I have in store for all of you in that podcast in 2023. So fear not, the Fly Midwest podcast will continue on. For those of you not familiar with the Fly Midwest podcast, I'll talk a little bit more about that podcast further on in this episode. So, what is Fly the Transition? What this podcast is about is storytelling. Storytelling of people who have taken great leaps of faith to chase after that dream of aviation. And that means a lot of different things for different people. It could be a complete profession change from something that maybe they were unhappy with. Maybe it was something they were incredibly successful with, but they just wanted to chase that dream. Or it could be that person who took something that was just a hobby to them and made it something so much bigger. Those are the stories that we want to tell. We want to hear where people came from, the steps that they took to get onto their path to aviation, and hopefully we'll inspire some people that are thinking about making that same leap of faith. So the job market is in such a weird place right now where not just aviation, but all these other industries are having these issues with trying to get people onboarded, hired, and retained. What this has done, though, is it's given these huge opportunities in aviation as well. We've been hearing for years about the pilot shortage, and it doesn't appear to be going anywhere anytime in the near future, so people have taken this opportunity to make those jumps into aviation. There's some who are calling this era the Great Resignation. We're seeing a bit of a generational shift where people aren't just loyal to a company and stay there for 20, 30, 40 years. You could take someone who on paper is incredibly successful, making a ton of money in a big corporation, and they're just not happy. And they're not staying anymore. They're finding ways to go out and get that fulfillment. So now we've got this great resignation, but we also have opportunity. Parts of this many saw coming before COVID even hit, where you just have an aging boomer generation that made up a large part of the workforce. So once COVID did hit, you saw a large portion of that generation that just didn't come back to work. Not in the same way that they used to, at least. So for us in aviation, as COVID started to lift, flights starting back up across the country, the demand for pilots only increased. Thus, opportunity. Now, you might say that being in general aviation has given me access to many people that were thinking about making a transition anyways, and the opportunity presented itself. But that's not entirely accurate either. As I've talked with people over the last 2 years or so, there's more and more people that are coming from different areas and walks of life that are going into aviation that weren't there before. So, you still with me? Good. Because here ends Jim's lesson on the workforce and how we got into this situation in the first place. But what this does for me is also provides opportunity. Opportunity to share those stories. I became so interested in the stories that everyone had for how they got into their career in aviation that I thought there had to be others that were interested too. So thus was born this podcast of sharing those stories and hoping to inspire others. So really this idea has been bouncing around in my head for a number of months now to find a way to do more to tell these stories and be more intentional about the storytelling aspect of people getting into aviation. So I've been podcasting for about a year now with the Flying Midwest podcast. And though that podcast serves to highlight aviation around the Midwest, I found that as I was talking with people on interviews or setting interviews up for that podcast, you're hearing stories like this of people who are not in their first career, but have now done just huge things in aviation. Take Amber Peterson. She's a flight instructor and a commercial airline pilot, and she came from a different profession altogether and got into aviation later in life and became AOPA's Flight Instructor of the Year. Now that is a huge honor that comes from a very large aviation advocacy group within the United States, and it's a national honor for her. So though we touched on those things in the other podcast, this podcast will give me the opportunity to dive even deeper into those stories and those transitions and the challenges that they faced to get to that point in aviation where they're now wildly successful. Here's the other thing. If I just sit here every week and I talk to a commercial pilot who was this, that, or the other thing, you might get bored pretty quick. So I plan on focusing on other aspects of aviation as well, because this whole dynamic that we're in affects those other areas as well, where you have people who have gone into air traffic controlling a little bit later. Now, granted, you can't go as late because of the rules the FAA has, but people making the change all the same. There's also plenty of people who have gone into airport management, aircraft maintenance, and even content creators. Now, this does beg the question of, am I here as a content creator as a second career? No, I'm not. For me, this is just a hobby. I really enjoy talking with people about aviation, and I enjoy sharing it. And if there's people out there that are willing to listen to it, or they're interested in listening to it, all the better. But I've been pretty humbled, actually, by the amount of people that are taking in podcasts in general, but more specifically, podcasts that I've created. To talk to people or to set up interviews with people and to go, I've already heard your podcast. I think it's great. And know our bits and know our little shticks that we do. It's really a cool experience that people are listening. So I'm hoping that same thing will resonate within this podcast, maybe with a different audience, maybe not. But again, the idea being that there are so many great stories out there of people making that transition, and I just want to get that out there. And like I said, hopefully inspire others that are just on that fence and maybe not ready to take that leap just yet. Maybe they'll hear a story of someone similar to them and go, I can do this too. So if anyone from my real work is listening, I'm not going anywhere. Sorry, you're stuck with me. However, this is a great opportunity for me to get some decompressing time, to step away from my real work and the stresses that come with that, and find something that brings me enjoyment and fulfillment. So I've talked about the things I hope to accomplish with the podcast. I've talked about how this idea has been bouncing around for a while. What I haven't talked about is the name and how I came up with Fly the Transition. Now, transition obviously is pretty obvious. You've got people in the different stages of life that are transitioning from one career field to the next. But why do I word it that way? Well, I spent a lot of time trying to think of some clever, catchy, aviation-related name to the point where maybe it was a little unhealthy the amount of time I was trying to rack my brain to find something catchy and clever. But then when I wasn't focused so much on it, something just came to me. So those of you who are familiar with aviation, you have SIDS and STARS within instrument flight, which are your standard instrument departures and arrivals. Within those, though, you have what's called a transition at times, which essentially is a branch off from the procedure that breaks you off and brings you in the direction of your destination. And when I really thought about it, that was perfect. So you might be going on one path in life, but now you've found this other path. You've taken this break from the standard procedure, and now you're going to take this other direction to bring you to your new destination. And at the end of the day, I think I did find something clever, catchy that also has a little bit of meaning. So hopefully that resonates with people, and that's why we came up with the name Fly the Transition. And just maybe if you're listening, it will encourage you to do just that. So I really appreciate you joining me today to hear a little bit about what Fly the Transition is all about. If you think this will be a cool concept, I hope that you'll like and subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow me on social media on Facebook at Fly the Transition, or if you want to email me, you can reach out to me at flythetransition@gmail.com. So, thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you next time.